Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is holding polarity. And we so often try to view things as good or bad, right or wrong, black and white. And the truth is, when we hold the polarity, we create the potential for both and generating something even more expansive. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Good morning, Rosalind, and welcome to you and everybody else who's joining us. And before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light from an energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together, feel all of that sensation, the tickling, the tingling, the pressure, the temperature, the friction, and allow all of that to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So today we're talking about holding polarity. And this conversation comes from a conversation that I had yesterday with someone who was really experiencing an opportunity to celebrate themselves and their achievement and their arrival into a new dimension of recognition and acknowledgement, and at the same time they were experiencing a less than celebratory concern for a friend that was overshadowing this really wonderful triumph. And so what we were talking about is that it doesn't have to be either or, like both of those things existed in the same space, and they didn't necessarily have the same weight until the attention is directed at that at one or the other. That naturally the celebration was a grander experience, like the sadness didn't have to, or the regret didn't have to outweigh the celebration. It didn't have to dampen the celebration. That both of those things can coexist without one obliterating the other, which is what we do when we make things right and wrong, or we create more weight on one thing than the other. And it's an interesting dance, actually. I've been talking with you lately about some of my own internal explorations and excavations, and it's been such an interesting ride because there are all kinds of old and painful feelings, perspectives, perceptions that have arisen to be dealt with, and the tendency when falling into those old patterns is to negate all the positive, to let all those old negative patterns and feelings overwhelm all the positive. And that's how that pattern operated in the past, is, to start feeling, well, so the feelings that were arising from me were old patterns of wrong and bad and worthless, and it was fascinating and surprising to recognize that some of those conversations or echoes of that conversation, those conversations were still present. After all this time, they'd been seemingly dormant, but as I have been recognizing them more consciously, I can recognize that they've had a subtle but persistent and pernicious impact on my being, and I wasn't even aware that they were still operative. These old patterns of self hatred, actually, self-hatred, lack of self-acceptance, that echoes of those things still remained, even though I haven't been present to the experience of it for heaven knows how long. As I've been digging more deeply into certain patterns and identities, and this came from actually making a declaration that, I intend to allow myself the experience of being loved, cherished, and adored. And as a result of that declaration, all this stuff is coming up that I didn't even know was still there. And I think that this is a conversation, I think that this is a relevant conversation for so many of us. I don't think I'm alone in discovering that there's still some very old programming that we thought maybe we had healed, transcended, eliminated, and only to find that there are echoes and remnants that might still be there on very, very deep level that's not particularly conscious and aware, and that shapes our behavior without our even being alert to these patterns as an influence. So it's interesting how we can end up on this, going down the rabbit hole of some of these, how these emotional patterns can take us down a rabbit hole. It's kind of pretty crazy to see how childhood patterns still play in our lives long past the time where we've experienced those patterns in a conscious way. I feel like I'm talking in circles a little bit, but hopefully you're following what I'm talking about. Um, so it was interesting to me to be looking into this notion of really allowing myself the experience of being loved, honored, and cherished and adored. Um, and where it has taken me, not surprisingly, is to a lack of self-love that still has remained in certain aspects on a very deep level, and self-judgment and self-hatred and um, lack of self-acceptance. So when we talk about receiving love, one of the things that is a maybe the thing that prevents us from experiencing and receiving love is a lack of self-love, even if it seems like just a little bit. You know, it's interesting when I do muscle testing work for myself and session work for myself. I often end up at 98% of where I want to get to, and it's that last 1% or that last fraction of a percent that holds the pattern in place. So it can be just the tiniest little bit, but the fact that it's still there holds holds the power of that pattern. It's wild. And it seems like that's what's arising now. And I work with the hypothesis and assumption that what's coming up is coming up to be healed. It's coming up because it's ready to be healed. And so, as painful as it can be, and as tremendously uncomfortable as it can be, we can take these experiences as opportunities to grow into our next greatest expression. So Rawson says the content of what one is perceiving, less important as to know why those perceptions exist. Although the why can help dissolve roadblocks, perhaps looking more closely at who is perceiving. Very interesting, Rosalind. So the content of what one is perceiving, less important as to know why those perceptions exist. And I think that that's a really good insight. Why isn't necessarily the most useful question, because why questions, we always find answers, whether they're true or not. Maybe how, maybe why, but to be, or what's underneath, what's driving the perceptions, what's conditioning, or what's creating the context for those perceptions. Because it is a rabbit hole. It is a rabbit hole that we can dive into more deeply to be discovering all these tendrils and tentacles of something. So, you know, I guess for me, what it's been is a process of unearthing and discovery. And it's challenging when those discoveries are painful or confronting. It's challenging to be able to look at them straight on. But there's such power to it. And when you say perhaps looking more closely at who is perceiving, so in that sentence, what the way I'm thinking about it is it my adult self? Is it my wounded child self that's perceiving? Who is it that's making this perception? And one of the things that therapeutically is so powerful that I've discovered and work with my clients is to bring our adult self to perceive and also often interact with our child self going through a certain experience or trauma, and to allow that adult self to offer comfort and new perception and to the wounded part, and to allow them to cultivate a relationship. And so in a material way, or imaginal material way, that really is a way for us to be able to hold the polarities, to hold the different perceptions by allowing those parts to communicate with one another. So good morning, Jenny. Jenny, it's so good to have you here with us. Jenny says, good morning, may I ask what holding polarity means? So polarity is kind of opposites, you know, the North and South Pole, hot and cold, black and white, yes and no, good and bad. Those are polarities. Those are things that are in opposition, which I'm going to say in air quotes, opposition to each other, and or seeming contradiction perhaps. And so when we, for instance, in this therapeutic process where we can bring the perceptions of our adult self and interact using those perceptions with the perceptions of our child self, we're not denying either of those perceptions, but what we're doing is finding a place of reconciliation that brings them together to a new awareness. And it's not that the adult is right or the child is wrong. It's that there are different perspectives. And I've seen the richness of the child contributing to the adult and the adult contributing to the child as these different perceptions are being held together. Like there's a synergy or a synthesis that can be created that results in an entirely new experience. And so that's really what we're looking at in holding polarity, that we hold that the energy that could be generated by the seeming friction between those two things until it pops up to a new level of awareness and context, and generates often unexpected outcomes too. So Jenny says, my daughter is avoiding communications and is ignoring again. I have no reason as to why or what I did or said. And so Jenny, it's so important. Okay, so here's a polarity, is your perception and her perception, and you don't know what her perception is. And so there's a place where part of you is just sad and distraught about the circumstance. And I imagine that there's a place where you can just be present to what is, without the judgment, without the interpretation, without the pain of it. Like that there is part of you that can be present to what is without the pain of it. And so there are these two parts of yourself that are engaged in this experience. And it's not that one is true and the other isn't. They're both true. They're both operative. And the question is, can we allow those things to coexist without falling fully into one or the other? And this is maybe even more complex than just polarity, because there's also the trying to understand and the stories that we generate in our attempt to make sense of things. And if we can hold all of that and notice that the holding is with open hand, we talk about this a lot, holding with open hand, to allow for the emergence of something new without trying to grasp, without trying to control. That we can, that like there's a dissonance that gets created that as we attempt to hold polarity, there's a dissonance, a discomfort that is this reconfiguration of energies that holds the potential for something new. Ralston says, if someone wants a new experience, maybe doing so with the construct of safety, but how to do that without looking at past experiences or conditional patterns, which may limit the potential. The reconciling is allowing both to exist. Exactly. So allowing the feeling of safety and unsafety. And because then maybe what gets generated beyond that is something beyond safety. Something beyond the conversation of safety that answers both. And I know that sounds abstract, but it is kind of an energetic thing that shifts the foundational experience. And it's a kind of magic that we have accessible to us. So where the conditional patterns, like to recognize that, like there's a part of me that is still immersed in self-hatred, this earlier part, self-judgment, self-hatred, self-deprecation, lack of self-acceptance. And then there's another part of me that is present to that and still and isn't operating from that place. And to be able to be respectful of those varying perceptions, to allow them to dance with one another, to come to a new place of awareness and experience. But the holding of those two or those varied patterns is really not necessarily the easiest thing. It can be pretty darn uncomfortable. And it has been extremely uncomfortable, I can tell you, over the past little while, to be in that bouncing back and forth between realities, so to speak, and to the point where they can coexist. And then what happens is something new. So Jenny says, I feel unappreciated and used, like I'm only worth speaking to if I have money to give her. I know she isn't responsible for my feelings, but being ignored is a form of emotional abuse, and it does hurt. I know that it can hurt, Jenny, and it certainly can be interpreted as a form of emotional abuse. And it can be interpreted as she's doing what she's doing, like she's not making herself available, she's not being responsive. And that's her stuff. And I'm not saying that one is more true than the other. They all exist. They all coexist. And to be able to be present to all of it allows us to move into a space where the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. And it may help to elevate to a different perspective. Because right now, yes, the perception is confusing and hard for my brain to understand, Jenny says. Exactly. That's kind of the point. Is that by trying to hold all of it at once, what happens is that you could say that something short circuits and it takes you to a different perception. Or you could say that all that energy building creates a quantum shift into a new awareness. And it is really uncomfortable to be holding all of that, because we want to jump to black or white, yes or no, right or wrong, makes things easier to deal with, but it doesn't necessarily give us the transformative solution or result. So no, it's not comfortable by any means. And there's magic and awakening to be had there. Jenny says, I absolutely agree. So being with the discomfort and recognizing that part of that discomfort, like for me, with my situation, recognizing the discomfort of all the feelings of self-judgment and self-abandonment and self-hatred and all of that on the while at the same time being reconciled and complete and self-respecting and self-appreciating on the other side, like holding all of these contradictions, it creates all this discomfort to be holding the contradictions. And at some point, they find a new place of resolution. It's a fascinating process, and I'm still in the midst of it, but it's really, really, really interesting. Anyway, I invite you to experience or experiment with this notion of holding polarity, of holding the contradictions with open hand, not trying to contain them, but allowing for them to have the interaction that they have so that they can move into the next level. And Jenny says, I want to share something. And I was just about to sign off, Jenny. Perhaps, I don't know what you're going to share. Yes, so Rosalind says, well wishes and ease and grace for going down the rabbit hole, allowing both with compassion for self. Jenny says, last week I had my 9-year anniversary of, and we don't know what that is yet. So in the meantime, I'm going to say, that's it for today. Hopefully, Jenny, you'll fill in the detail there. I'm Mira. Last week, okay, sorry, I thought there was something new in the chat. We're going to celebrate a 9-year anniversary, even though we don't necessarily know what it is. And so I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And Jenny, congratulations on your 9-year anniversary. And until next time, so much love to you.